Hello, this is the Women in Finance Let's Talk podcast. I'm Siobhan, and today I've got Emma Boardwell with me from Emotional Finance. Hi, Emma.
Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Not bad. So, firstly, thank you for coming onto the podcast. Much appreciated to have you here. I've got a few questions for you. We're obviously going to talk about stuff to do with working in finance, some of the challenges we may face, and obviously touch upon your company, Emotional Finance. So, firstly, we'll start off with how long you've been working for financial services for, and obviously what kind of made you decide to come into finance. Was it something you always intended?
Hey, well, I am a baby here. I have only been in financial services for about 3 years, so I'm a real newbie, and I had absolutely no intention to be here. So my background was as a psychotherapist. I worked as a psychotherapist for many, many years in private practice, but also working. I live in Sheffield, working at the University of Sheffield, and training other psychotherapists. And my journey into financial services started actually with a book. So my adult son at the time had just graduated from university.
Yeah.
And he came home one day and announced casually, with no job secured, to my husband and I, that he was house hunting in a really expensive neighbourhood of Manchester with his friends. And so my husband and I sat up late that night stressing, oh my God, we haven't taught him the important life lessons. How are we going to make sure he doesn't make this really unwise financial decision? And we ended up buying him a book. And the book was called, am I allowed to swear on this podcast? Because I have
Yeah,
to
you'll be
tell
fine.
people.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. It's called, well, actually, I can temper it. It was called How to Manage Your Money Like an Effing Grown Up.
Yeah.
And he never read that book because nobody reads books their mum buys them, obviously. So it sat on the coffee table for ages until eventually one day I picked it up because it was gathering dust and I started flicking through, and then like 6 hours later I closed it and I'd read it cover to cover, because I guess what I realised that day was that it wasn't just my newly adult son who had to learn how to manage his money like an effing grown up. It was me, and I was 47. So I decided to really devote some time to that. And luckily, I was on a career break because I had just closed my psychotherapy practice and was about to begin a master's at the London School of Economics. So I had this of gap in time. So I decided that I was going to devote that time to learning as much as I could about personal finance. And because I don't do things by halves, and also not only that, because I don't actually think there are many ways to do this, to really, well, there weren't back then, maybe there are more now. I signed up to do a diploma in financial advice with the London Institute of Banking and Finance. And basically, as I was doing that, I started to think, oh, actually, why don't I become a financial advisor? And so I withdrew from the masters and I took a role in a local firm as a trainee financial advisor. Wow, this story's taken quite a long time. I bet you didn't realise it was going to take this long.
No,
anyway,
no.
I will speed to the end, which is that when I then took that role, I guess, well, for a start, I took that role in exactly the same week that firm was being acquired by a large national consolidator. So I'm going to swear again. It was an absolute shit show, because that's what happens. And so that was a bit of an eye-opener. And then I just sort of, over the next few months, what really struck me was how, and I'm generalising here, and I know that there are exceptions, but how kind of over-indexed the profession is on technical expertise, and kind of I felt chronically inattentive to the more human dimensions of the role.
Yeah.
And it was at that stage I thought, oh, actually, there's, I'd love to do something about this. That really lights my fire. And so at that point, I decided to found Emotional Finance to kind of fill that gap between the technical and the human dimensions of the role.
Yeah, no, amazing. I think you're exactly right in the fact that a lot of it is based on the technical and, all of the sort of like what you can do with all the products and services that are out there, which of course is part and parcel of what we do. It is, but I agree in the fact that there sometimes is a tendency to forget about the, like say, the human dimensions, the
Yeah.
psychology behind it, the reasons why. I mean, I'm the first person when it comes to working in compliance. Obviously, I do a lot of file reviews and all that kind of thing. And the first things I said, why do they want to do that for? And when an advisor kind of goes, well, because why wouldn't they? I'm all like, well, that's not really explaining it to me, is it? Like, did you actually go into detail with it? You've told them all of the options, but have they really gone through? So obviously we get to a point where it's sorted, but I do think it's one of those things where when you're in that meeting with that client initially, it sometimes is hard to remember, to kind of realize actually this is just a person in front of me
Yeah.
and they've got no idea.
And it's really unsurprising because there is no attention paid to that in the training
No.
to be an advisor. So of course it's not going to, as advisors, there are so many things we have to keep a hold of, and there's so many things that are put in our direct line of sight that we need to be really, really concerned with. Of course, the things that aren't given, I can't think of the word, that they're not kind of given this main character energy. Of course, they're not going to
Yeah.
be front of mind. And then I had another point, which was, oh yeah, when you said that, what that also made me think of is that, yes, you're absolutely right, and I couldn't agree with you more. Of course, the technical aspect is imperative. You couldn't do this
Yeah.
job without that.
No.
But as it didn't take us long. How many minutes have we been in? 7 minutes, and I'm going to bring up AI. As AI and all the digital tools can do a lot of that technical stuff,
Yeah.
that relational aspect becomes the differentiator. It becomes the important thing that we have to focus on. Otherwise, we're just going to be the same as everybody else, and
Yeah.
or we're going to be the same as AI. So that's another kind of reason why there's such an opportunity now to focus on that aspect, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I'm there, right there with you. I think it's such a personable subject, should we say, when it comes to people's finances, and the, like I say the reasons why, but the rationale behind even the reason why they've asked for advice in the first place. Like, they've obviously got themselves to a certain point, they've then gone, I need help with this. And I think that's what we're here for. That's what financial services is for. That's my opinion of these things. I very much pride myself on the fact that I work in a profession that is aimed at giving a service to people, and to our clients, and it's not just about sticking them into a pension portfolio and then forgetting about it.
Yeah.
So yeah. So oh, 1 second, sorry, I've got a call there. That wasn't planned. So yeah, obviously we've gone through how you ended up in finance. Obviously you are now founder of Emotional Finance, which is obviously aimed at encouraging people to consider the emotional finance aspects and the human dimension, as you said. What's your sort of, run me through like what your actual role is yourself? What do you go out and do, and how can people get involved and all of that kind of stuff with emotional finance?
Yeah, well, I'm quite a young business still. Not sorry, I've got a frog in my throat, which is not what you want to have when you're recording a podcast. Bear with, I'm just going to have a glass of water.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I'm quite a young business, so I want to be transparent and say that I'm still figuring it out. As in, I have these ideas and I'm still in that stage of kind of shape shifting to make sure that I meet the market, for want of a better word, in a way that suits them. So it's a work in progress. But where I am right now is that I guess, well, I sort of see that there's 3 arms to what I do. And they're all kind of growing with momentum, but maybe, you know, in different ratios. One of the activities that I spend quite a lot of time doing is speaking. So whether that be in big formats at conferences, whether that be at internal planning events with firms, or whether that be in kind of much more small, intimate settings with, you know, somebody that's sponsored a gathering of people. So I do quite a bit of speaking and taking a kind of thought leadership angle on that, I guess. Then I do quite a bit of consultancy.
Yeah.
In really just help. So I guess the expertise I bring at this kind of really weird intersection between financial services and psychotherapy is that I'm drawing on my expertise and experience, which really is around how do real relationships work in the real world. How do we build trust, whether that's between a person like an advisor and a client, or whether that's with an organization or a brand and their customers. How do real relationships work? How do we build trust? How do we connect? How do we make our clients or our customers feel like they matter? And how do we work with them in a way that doesn't feel one-way transactional, but is collaborative and has a kind of a sense of allyship or advocacy? And so I use that expertise in a consultancy dimension with firms who want to apply that insight in whatever way, whether it's in the whole culture of their company, or whether it's to the services they offer, or how can they demonstrate that through the literature or the encounters with the product. So speaking, consultancy, and then the third part, which isn't, you know, going back to that thing, to what I said about shapeshifting, this is the third part is what I thought I'd be doing. Those other two parts kind of grew, and that's really exciting. But the third angle is kind of educational practice, I guess, broadly speaking. And that is from kind of training on my emotional finance model, which is a translation, I guess, of the skills and practices and insights of psychotherapy that are relevant to financial services. Because, of course, what I'm not suggesting for 1 second is that financial planners and advisors or anybody in financial services needs to be a therapist.
No,
obviously not. But there are skills and practices and tools that are really, really relevant and really, really help us do a good job. And so that my model translates that.
Yeah.
So I do, you know, like formal training, and then I also work one-to-one and in groups on kind of more applied professional development work. So part of that, the one thing that I've been doing just this year and fills my heart with joy is that I've been moving this kind of lean is less kind of formal training and more professional development, which runs along the theme of, if we are building relationships with our clients, we need to pay attention to those relationships and how they impact our clients, but also how they impact us. Yeah. And where do we go for support and space with a really rough month where 3 of my clients have passed away, or I've had a really difficult conversation with a client who's broke down about their divorce, or you know, what do I do? How do I deal with all my feelings as the firm I work for is being acquired, and I'm feeling really, really disorientated and unsure about my future and how I'm going to look after my clients who are expecting me to be present and attentive to them, but my brain's off elsewhere. All those sorts of things. I've formed peer groups where financial professionals can come and, I guess, get support and challenge, and a sense of a lot of financial professionals tell me that it's very lonely at times. Yes. So that's a space to do that. So whilst that's not educational, it kind of fits under that sort of educational practice arm. And I'm sure there's other things, but I can't remember them now. That I run workshops as well with particularly. So one of the workshops that's particularly popular at the moment, for understandable reasons, that make your heart fill with joy, given your compliance background, is thinking about how to approach vulnerability from a relational point of view. So
Yeah.
not about a compliance tick box, but if we want our clients to disclose vulnerabilities to us, we
Yeah.
have to create a sort of disclosure friendly environment.
Yeah.
And there's lots to think about there that is not in the usual standard training pathway for advisors to think about. So yeah, that I think is a good summary of what I'm up to.
Yeah, no, and vulnerability, obviously a major buzzword in the compliance world at the moment. Absolutely love that. Yeah. No, well, that's really good to see because, like you say, it is very easy for things to become tick box exercises and just been doing it because we've been asked to by the FCA and other, regulations and law and rules. But I'm very keen to like make sure that actually it's something that, for me, it's just about thinking about it, because it's not being so much of an obvious topic that you might have done with, or brought up with your clients.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're turning around going, are you vulnerable right now? That's not what I'm asking you to do. But those are things that we've been picking up on vulnerabilities for a long period of time. We've just not classed them as that. But they are right. Like, for example, if a client is going through a bit of a tricky time with their partner, going through a bit of a divorce, they've lost a friend recently, or family members, or whichever, all of those kind of things, there's stuff that we pick up all the time, like from medical conditions, their health, when you're doing all your fact-finding process. These are all things that could combine together and be classed as vulnerabilities. One of the ones that I like for myself is talking about like what we call, or what is classed as, like income shocks and stuff like that. You've got clients that come across because they've suddenly got a big inheritance that they've received. That's a vulnerability. They've never had that money before. They don't know what to do with it. It's all new to them. But not only that this has obviously come across because of, they've lost a family member, or, they're going through a grief stage. And, your mind at that time is obviously you're not sure what you're doing. And when it comes to the inheritance that you received, obviously, I've got to do something about it. Like, I don't know. And therefore, I think it is kind of like, this is where, for me, as financial professionals, we're there to hold people's hands through those tough times. I think I'm very big myself on that kind of relationship building with a client. And I think it's very important that, my other half, he said to me before that his dad, who's no longer with us and stuff, but his three things were, say, you need three important people in your life. That's a financial advisor, a solicitor, and an accountant. And that you need to find the right ones, because you're going to need them throughout your entire life. And I think that's true in terms of relationship building. Those are the people that you're going to go to when tough times are happening and go, well, what do I do here?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's a big ask. Because if you have not had any training in how to handle, let's just use an example of somebody who's inherited, so they're dealing with grief and disorientation and feeling probably overwhelmed by the decision making they've got to do. How do you deal with that without, if you haven't had some training and structure, both in terms of what are your relational responsibilities, like being really clear about what the relationship is and isn't, but also the opportunity to have built those skills to be able to meet them in a way that builds the relationship. And I say that because I think there's almost no financial professional I've met who isn't motivated by good intentions, that they really want to do the best by that client. But what I see is that whilst ever we treat that relationship building and that the human dimensions of the role in that kind of informal, instinctive way, what happens is we kind of rely on those informal, instinctive default behaviours. And so I see, and these are extreme caricatures here, but they are also true. And of course, there's lots of space in the spectrum between. Is advisors who, with very good intentions, but without the confidence to have those kind of more nuanced, emotional, supportive conversations, freak out a bit, and they retreat and they go into technical mode, and they kind of dismiss the emotional aspect of that conversation, which isn't good for the advisor, because they're not building a sort of relationship that's meaningful and irreplaceable. But it's also not great for the client, because they're not getting the support that in that moment they need.
Exactly.
Or at the other end of the spectrum, if we're being informal and instinctive, some advisors fall into the default of being the emotional support. They get kind of lost down the rabbit holes. They overextend their role to being an emotional crutch, rather than the boundaried professional helping a client to make the decisions that need to be made at that time, in an informed way. And that is also not good for the advisor, because they end up burnt out often, or feeling a sense of emotional weight and responsibility and not getting enough support with that. And it's not great for the client either, because they're not getting that focused kind of directive advice that they need.
No. And I think it's a very fine balance to have of, you know, what do you need to do. I think for myself, if I was a client and I had an advisor and I was, you know, raising my concerns, and they just spat out all the technology part, this is what we're going to do, we're going to put it in this, blah 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 blah, it's a bit overwhelming. It's a bit, oh, okay, yeah. Whereas actually maybe I need to go, right, okay, here's some options, but let's talk about, you know, what's going to motivate you, what's your actual rationale behind this, and, you know, let's talk you through all of the elements. And that's a much more slower approach for myself. That would be not all clients
but also
like that.
In there, sorry,
no go on.
Just interrupt for a second, because also in there is the aspect that if you have disclosed one vulnerability, and the advisor kind of shuts down the emotional aspect of it, that's a message of, this isn't really our domain. I don't really deal with emotions. I'm only interested in the numbers. And then that client is not going to disclose the other vulnerabilities underneath that. And then you end up in a problematic place where actually you're stumbling upon compliance problems now, and not fulfilling your responsibilities of consumer duty. So there's actually a real red light warning sign about that too.
No, and I think obviously it's one of the main topics, or, you know, it's a hot discussion at the moment. You know, obviously the FCA have asked us to really sort of go in on this, and, you know, make sure that we are paying attention to these vulnerabilities, and, you know, what things are we doing in place to kind of protect those clients, but to support them, like you say. So I just want to quickly touch on the fact that obviously we were talking about emotional support, not just for clients, but also for advisors in the community. I think, I personally don't think there's enough. I mean, obviously, you and I, we both have met because of the sort of Empowered Women in Finance group. Which obviously is I suppose, like a support network for women financial advisors, or women financial professionals. So obviously admins, everyone. But that group works really well in itself. But it is literally just scratching. You know, you know, it's not a huge place, like, in order to kind of divulge all, you know, where you are a bit worried and all that stuff. People do.
Well, it's a gateway more than a
but
scratch,
it's a gateway, exactly. And I think hearing what you're doing, as in, you know, doing your peer groups and all that kind of stuff, that's, you know, that's lovely to hear, like, honestly, because I do think you're right. For a very long time, I think advisors have kind of felt like they're on their own, especially if they're not part of a network themselves, like an AR network, or, you know, if they're not employed advisors and you're just, you know, self-employed, or you're an independent firm yourself. You haven't really got many people to talk to. And let's be honest, the only time that we see anyone is when we do go to conferences and when we do go to these things, and then, you know, it's not the space or the time really to talk about it.
And within firms, you know, like, it's wonderful when people work within a culture that does encourage these sorts of conversations. But I think, you know, I guess we're talking about women in finance now. You've just mentioned that. And I guess the elephant in the room is that the cultural norms in finance have primarily been
Yeah.
created by men. I mean, of course, that's changing now and that's wonderful, but they're pretty stubborn, those norms.
Yeah.
And so often within firms, and of course, again, I am massively generalizing, and there are wonderful examples where this isn't the case. But my experience tells me that the firms that many the majority of firms are kind of not over indexed, because the commercial concerns are obviously,
Yeah.
you can't have a firm without a commercial concern, and that is really important, obviously. I mean, that's the most obvious thing I've ever said in my life. But what I'm saying is that those firms don't pay as much or enough attention to the human dimension. So even within a firm, even if you're working with other advisors, there's not the time dedicated often to think about together anything other than the commercial concerns.
Yeah.
Or possibly client concerns.
Yeah.
In some firms they might make space for that. But there's not the really dedicated space. Sometimes there's mentoring, which of course is really helpful, but it's still, in my mind, isn't quite enough.
No, and I think that's true in itself. And actually, I'm just thinking some of the places I've worked at before that actually, although you're employed as advisors, so therefore you're part of a firm yourself, actually thinking about it now, I'm more like, how many of those advisors are actually talking to the other advisors in that firm? Like, there'll probably be a few of them that are quite friendly with each other and consider each other as close peers. But actually, on the main of it, if you've got between 20 to 50 advisors in your firm, guaranteed they're not talking to each other. They're not sharing all of, not just their ideas, but all of those experiences. And like you say, this is where like mentorship does come in as an element. And again, it's something like I touched on when I was speaking to Kerry the other week. But I'm very much a huge believer in the fact that there's all, we were talking about how the experience is leaving the profession whilst you've got new people coming in. And although they might have the skills and the knowledge, that experience of dealing with people and that experience of dealing with tough times is kind of not there anymore, because people obviously we've got people who are retiring or leaving, and then you've got no mentorship in that way. So I'm hoping, should I say, that we're going in the right direction now, and there's people are realizing that actually it isn't just something that you can just go study and learn, as you and I probably both know. I also actually did the LIBF course, so I'm familiar with that. And you can't just study it and then go, right, I'm ready. It doesn't work that way. Like you've got to put things into practice. You've got to learn these skills at the same time. And I think it's going to be interesting how the next generation of advisors and whatnot, and how the advice profession continues.
It's interesting you say that, because I've been having quite a few conversations recently about that kind of tricky stage for advisors who have got all their training and they've done the shadowing and they know what they're doing and they're building their confidence, but either they or their managers just don't feel quite able to sign that CAS off until they feel a bit more confident running the human dimension of those relationships with their clients. And so I've been running a few, I've been speaking with a few managers and early career advisors about running some sort of mastermindy type pre-CAS sign-off, role play practice, opportunities to chew over what they're worried about, what their strengths are, playing out some scenarios of how they might handle it. And I mean, if I had my magic wand, I would put that into every single firm that's got early career advisors, because it's one part, they have their compliance sign-offs, but what I'm hearing is that that's not enough.
No, No, and yeah, potentially so. I mean, I think what's good about firms like yourself, like the emotional finance thing, is thinking outside of the box of just going,
Mm,
we're financial services, we just should be advisors, power planners,
mm,
admin, and all that stuff. Actually, I think it's wider than that. You know, the fact that
mm,
you've got your own company that is dedicated to you know, the psychology of it all, and you know how you can add that human dimension in, and all that kind of stuff, and that training of that all, because you're not necessarily
mm.
training them to how to be an advisor, you're training them
Definitely
how to,
not.
exactly, but you know what I mean, it's about incorporating that all of the skills that you've learnt before
Mm,
from being a psychotherapist,
mm,
how to harness them and include them in your advice service.
mhm,
And I think there is much more out there. You know, I mean, obviously for bigger firms, they've got their own marketing team, they've got their HR and their T&C and all that kind of stuff. But I think for the profession itself, you know, there are different, what's the word I'm looking for? Different areas that could be picked up and go, actually, we need an expert in that field, or we need
mm,
someone to
mm.
go, like, actually, is what we're doing the right thing anymore, or how can we improve it? And I think it's great. I think you coming along and doing that yourself, absolutely
Mm.
amazing. You say it's early days yet for yourself, you know, you're still a baby, but I think at least you've gone, actually, I think we could probably do this a little bit better. um
Yeah.
Stop here for a
I'm, t-
second.
I'm tenacious. I'm
Yeah,
tenacious.
yeah, that's it. But we love it, and you know, I think that's amazing, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you and emotional finance do going forwards. We're going to take a pause here. We're going to have a little bit of a break, and we're going to record the second part. So come back for that.